back on the 0 Hour. This is your host, of course, Richard RJ Eskow. Thanks for listening as always. Joining me once again is the Reverend William H. Lamar IV. Reverend Lamar joined us a few weeks ago after he wrote a terrific piece about the coronavirus and what it represented in our culture, including our theological culture. He is the co-author of a new piece, which I read recently and wanted to ask him about. It was published on July 7th here in Washington, D.C. He co-wrote it with Father John Ensler, who is a Catholic priest, and it is entitled "Our Christian Duty is to Promote a Just Recovery That Advances Racial Justice." It's such an important topic. So first of all, Reverend Lamar, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Richard, for the opportunity.
You know, I thought what you and Father Ensler had to say was important on multiple levels, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about it. I would say that the key sentence in it, if I were to choose, would be, you know, you're talking about the District of Columbia specifically, where both you and Father Ensler are based, but the sentence that to me, it's about taxation and other things, but the sentence itself is, we urgently need to create a just recovery, not only from this pandemic, but also from years of systematic underinvestment in the least of us. Now, I should have looked this up beforehand, but I believe that's a reference to Matthew 5, verse 9. Do I have that correct?
I think you got it right.
All right. Well, good. I passed it. And that is, as you do to the least of me, of these, so too do you do to me. To me, as we talked about last time, this is all, to me, it's almost like the electrical plug in Christianity that all too infrequently gets plugged into the socket. And I guess what I mean by that is that this nation is filled with people who call themselves Christians, and I don't mean to down anybody. I'm just saying this is my observation, but are not yet prepared to take that step of what does a verse like that mean to a society and to me individually as a citizen or what have you. Is that a good take on this article you and Father Ensler wrote, or is it a distraction? Why don't we start there?
No, I think that that's a fair read, and I dare not speak for Father Ensler, although we share quite a bit. I definitely want to be clear that I'm speaking from my perspective. And I think a place to start, Richard, is with a concept that many of your listeners may be familiar with. That concept is civil religion. And I want to draw a distinction between America's civil religion and between those of us who are endeavoring to follow Jesus. What civil religion does is it incorporates the signs, the symbols, the language of Christianity in the furtherance of American military, corporate, capitalist power. It totally divorces itself from the ethic of Jesus. And when I say ethic of Jesus, I mean following Jesus, walking as he walked, doing as he did. So they are well aware, as I have stated before publicly, that you can move people by using the signs, the symbols, and the language without the ethics. And that's exactly what they do. They appropriate crosses and churches and Bibles, but they do not endeavor to wrestle with the ethic of Jesus. And let me be clear, that's hard as hell for anybody to wrestle with and to live. So I am not claiming perfection as one who's endeavoring to follow, but I will admit that I'm trying to follow, and to have a blind spot around money and material possessions is to completely deny the ethic of Jesus. So those who would be followers of Jesus, Christians, know that Jesus himself addressed taxation according to the gospel accounts. Now, why did Jesus address taxation? If you read Obery Hendrick's book, The Politics of Jesus, he talks about the fact that Jesus lived, of course, under Roman oppression. The people, and Jesus was amongst those who were colonized under the imperial boot of Rome, and they were triple taxed. They were taxed by the temple, by the religious authorities. They did not wait like we do at church for people to give. The temple took it. they were taxed by regional imperial authorities, and they were taxed by Rome itself. So there were three levels of payola. Paid the religious leaders, you paid Pilate and the regional folks who Rome kept fat as long as they kept Rome fat, and you paid Rome directly. Kind of similar to the way that I pay taxes to when I was living into to the District of Columbia, to the United States government, gas taxes, other kinds of consumption taxes. So Jesus spoke out against taxation because his people were crippled by it. And Jesus lived under a very regressive system where the less you had, the more you paid proportionally. And that is where we are today. So I agree with you, and I want to make sure that we shine a lens, a hermeneutic of suspicion upon those who appropriate Christian language without the ethic, without the following.
Well, I haven't talked about this in many years, but about 15 years ago, I love gospel music, and I wrote a gospel song called "I Wish More Christians Loved Jesus." That was the whole point of it, including some of the preachers, right? I mean, I can't recite the verses off. I wish more preachers loved Jesus, the ones you see on TV with their daily ratings charts and their unforgiving hearts and political hypocrisy. And, I guess, there's the flock and there's a shepherd, right? And if the flock goes over a cliff, I would tend to blame the shepherds. And so to me, and that gets to something I was thinking as you were speaking, Reverend Lamar, about the story of Jesus and taxation. There are those within the Christian community who I would say, or profess Christians, who use that kind of story and the story about the Roman authorities and the religious authorities as an excuse for anti-Semitism. And
yes.
I would say the meaning to me, personal meaning, but of course I want your opinion, personal meaning to me of that story is not about whether they were Jews or not Jews, Christians or not Christian. Obviously, there were no, Jesus was the beginning of that. But to me, the story was about when leaders of a faith community become too close to the political power, to the powerful in that community, that's a kind of corruption. So to me, turning water into wine is like Gandhi doing the salt march. It's a defiance of authority. To me, it's about what happens when the primacy of faith is subordinated to the powers that be. And that's where the whole tax thing can be used for good or evil. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, it does. And I want to be very clear, Richard. Thank you for bringing up the anti-Semitism, because I want to talk about that. We actually we study scripture on Wednesdays at noon and at 7. And we were talking about Paul. And what I have shared with Christians is, in order to read this stuff, the Jews are picked on by gospel writers, particularly the Gospel of John and sometimes in Paul, because they were the religious establishment. Mm-hmm. Way to read the Gospels and to read Paul contemporarily is to replace that language around the Jews with the church. It is a critique of whomever is the religious establishment. This is what I tell people, and I don't get very popular for saying it, but Jesus was killed by people like me. Religious establishment, theologically trained, robes, connected, middle class. We killed Jesus. He was killed by the religious establishment of its day. The only way to read that honestly in our moment is to place religious authorities under scrutiny, which is what John was doing, because John was clear that the religious authorities had the blood of Jesus upon their hands. And I am clear that today I have the blood of Jesus on my hands, because when we allow systems of taxation, when we allow people not to have health care, not to have living wages, not to live as humans ought to live, that is killing Christ in the present moment. And we cannot be exonerated as long as we keep our mouths closed and don't seek to replace the system that crucifies with a system that allows human beings to flourish. And so I want to put that on the table and then say that then as now, the powerful know what these languages and symbols and signs evoke. And so, you know, you go back and you will probably know this, Richard. I think it may have been under Eisenhower or Truman that the extremely wealthy paid up to 90% of their wealth in taxes. Okay. Now in the Reagan era, and I'm going to say you got an unbroken era of conservatism, neoliberalism from Reagan clear through Obama into Trump, because even the way that Obama in the midst of the crisis bailed out the rich, believing that they would subsequently bail out the poor, economists have proven that giving to the rich does not trickle down. The one thing I agree with George Herbert Walker Bush about when he was running against Ronald Reagan in 1980, he called that kind of economics voodoo economics. Although I don't like his disparaging of the faith tradition of voodoo, I understand what he meant. He meant that he knew that it was bull, that when you give rich people money, they save it, they invest it. It does not trickle down. And so the taxation system that crushed Jesus is crushing us, because this is the problem I have, and I'll stop, Richard. How can you say that God is responsible for this accumulation of wealth, that it is ingenuity, it is meritocracy, when really what happened is a reversal of public policy, that instead of them paying, they have been receiving. That has nothing to do with God, has nothing to do with merit, has nothing to do with genius. It's public policy. Instead of those who had paying, you have shifted the burden of taxation to people who are least able to pay, but also to people who are the least organized politically. And you got to marry that with the Citizens United Supreme Court case, where the court said that money is speech, which means the more money you have, the louder you communicate, the more you can buy the politics. And we have the best politics, the best public policy that money can buy. And those with money have bought it in order to support and to buttress their position in society. And what I am saying, along with my co-author, is that system is evil and has to be replaced.
And again, we're talking with the Reverend William Lamar IV here on the Zero Hour. And if I read you correctly, Reverend Lamar, what you're saying is the 21st century Sanhedrin, you know, the religious authorities of the time are any theologian who tolerates the misuse of their own faith tradition, or stands silent in the face of the injustices that so resemble those of the time of Jesus. Is that more or less right?
I could not state it better. You're right. We are they are we. We must read ourselves as the religious leaders of our day. And I am including me. I must be read with suspicion unless I practice the ethic.
See, and what goes along with that to me, Reverend Lamar, and again, as you know, but you know, whoever listening might not know about me personally, is that I had a Jewish and Christian background, raised Jewish, but also lived with Southern Baptist relatives, and had a Catholic grandmother. So I think that's most of them who terrified us. But you know, from France. But I guess when I look at all of this, one of the things that since I consider myself an ethical follower of Jesus as we know him and understand him, is that, there's this kind of cultural presentation of Jesus as this sort of sweet, peaceful, passive guy, love, of course, we won't get into the rosy red cheeks and white skin and blue eyes and all that, uncharacteristic of the people of his place and time, but, of this sort of passive Jesus, right? And of course, he did preach love, and he did preach, the family of all of us, human beings, and all those things. But when I think of Jesus, I think of somebody who is really not afraid to say things that shocked his listeners and followers, things that shock the people around him, overturning the table, the moneylenders' tables, whatever it might be, challenging people who might put their family relationships before, their higher purpose, what have you. It seems to me being loving and being nice are not always the same thing. And we live in an era where maybe people use this aspect of their understanding of Jesus to say, well, I really shouldn't rock the boat. It seems to me maybe the tradition is, yeah, you should rock the boat.
Well, I think that you say it well. Love is not being nice. Cornel West has a shorthand that I like. Love is what justice looks like out loud. And so Jesus' form of love was not a mushy emotional connection. Jesus' form of love was loving us into the reality of the reign of God in time and space into eternity. So what that means is the love of Jesus was not a non-confrontational love. It was not a passive love. It was aggressive in turning over tables. It was aggressive in calling the political and religious leaders of his day foxes. Go tell that fox, brood of vipers. It was the kind of love that was never silent in the midst of injustice. It was the kind of love that did not tolerate the lie of scarcity in the midst of God's abundance. So let's tie this into taxation. What Jesus does is he has someone bring him a fish. In the fish is the coin. Jesus says to the people, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and unto God that which is God's. Now, my best interpretation from folks who read the scripture far more elegantly and eloquently than I is that Jesus is ultimately saying, whose image is on this coin? Well, Caesar's image is on the coin. You give Caesar coins. Whose image is upon you? God's image. You were made in God's image and likeness. You give yourself to God. So Jesus's argument is Caesar controls small petty things. Give him small petty allegiance. That's what he wants. But give yourself, your love, your solidarity, your ultimate allegiance to the work of God. And what that is overturning anything that smells like this taxation system that is in the District of Columbia, most of the states and territories in Imperial America, and the federal government itself. And so we just have to be very clear that Jesus' love was not smoochy, that kind of love. It was the kind of love. And again, you know this, that the English language is very poor in many respects, but very poor in what it calls love. You and I could say we love our spouses, our children, our partners, but we also say we love our cars, we love pizza. They had better ways of expressing it. There was agape, which is this love of God that we learned about in seminary, where the lover loves the beloved, whether or not the beloved returns the love of the lover. Like, you got that kind of love. You got philios, the love between brothers and sisters, city of Philadelphia, brotherly love. You got eros, the kind of love that caused our parents to create us. You've got multiple kinds of thinking about love. And Jesus' love is that agape love, which pushes you out to do risky things in the name of God's reign, whether or not the love is requited. And that's interesting for us. We are not interested in loving where love is not returned, which is why Jesus says, who cares if you love people that love you? That's not commendable. I need you to love whether or not the love is returned, because you are working with what God is doing to overturn this injustice and to bring all humanity together.
Well, Reverend William Lamar, I guess I would ask you then, given that there is this kind of love, and given that you and Father Ensler expressed it in this case, in the DC line, with addressing, in a sense, the mayor here, Muriel Bowser, taxing people earning $60,000 in taxable income at the same rate as those earning $350,000, as DC currently does, is unjust and diminishes our ability to care for those most in need. And by the way, it was not, okay, quick diversion. Since you said I would probably know what the tax rate was in the 50s, I do. And I remember Rick Perry, when he was running for president as a Republican, said, I want the country, the America that I was born into, to come back. And I said, okay, born in 1953, top tax rate was 92%. Is that what you're telling us? No, that was not what he was telling us. But there's got to be people who push back against both you, Father Ensler, and for the matter, they did that with Dr. King. They've done that throughout the generations in this country, against people of, clergy men and women who speak out on these issues. You must be getting people saying, oh, stay in your wheelhouse, Rev. We'll come to you on Sunday maybe to hear the high, minded talk. But when it comes to taxation, stay out of it. Did you get that kind of pushback?
No, Richard, I would love to be able to self-aggrandize and talk about how much I'm suffering but no one has pushed back. No one has pushed back. Not like when King spoke in '67 against the Vietnam War, and right. Black people left him like he had the plague, and white people left him like he was a skunk who had sprayed upon them. So no, I have not suffered in that way. People have said this is right. And so, what that probably means is that I live in an echo chamber of people who think like me, but I've not had the pushback. But we are clear, you and I both are clear, there are many people who practice American civil religion who would read this and would say, stay in your lane, you're being political. But what I say to that, Rich, is something I wrote about some years ago and thought about in Christian Century. There is nothing that is not political. All speech is political. All religious practice is political. Everything is political because everything ultimately has to do with what God has created, how that creation is distributed and shared equitably or inequitably. So the people on the right, the Jeffers, the Jerry Falwell Jr.'s, the Joel Osteens, all those kinds of people, what I would say to them is you are as political. I would not allow them to call me political without calling out their politics, which are the politics of the status quo, which are the politics of injustice. If you tell me leave the tax rate alone, then those are your politics. My politics are upended because it is regressive. And in my language, it is evil because you're extracting from people who have little at a higher rate. So if you're taxing somebody who's making $60K at the same rate of somebody who's making 6 times what they make, $360K, then the person who is, and Americans must have failed math because percentages hit harder than raw amounts. So 10% of 60,000 is 6,000. 10% of 36,000 is 10% of 60,000 is 6,000. 10% of 360 is 36,000. But if you subtract the 6 from the 60, you got 54. You subtract 36 from the 360,000, then you still got over 300 grand. There is nothing fair about it. And what we also have to realize, people like Rick Perry who want to paint these Leave It to Beaver kind of images, his family was able to do better. I don't remember his background. Let's just assume he was from a working class background. Well, it would have been much easier for his family to accumulate wealth in that kind of taxation. Plus, if his family was given, like most white families, federal government backing to go and start the suburbs, right? It's absolutely ridiculous.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And that gets on to, you get, and again, we're talking with Reverend William Lamar IV. It gets into this whole question, sensitive in a lot, and understandably in a lot of cases. You get this whole debate. It's been rekindled by the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and, following this horrific on camera, killing, a murder of George Floyd. But you get into this whole question where people say, on my side of the color line, let's say, well, but I didn't benefit from any of this as a white person. I haven't had a job in 10 years. My little Iowa community here there's no jobs at all. My son just died of a opioid overdose. And, what about me, right? You get this whole,
Right.
and so what I've struggled with is, look, I know I've experienced white privilege in a number of ways, but what I struggle with is the balance, I should say, between what we might call the brotherhood agenda or unity agenda, solidarity agenda, like the Poor People's Campaign as it was being envisioned in 1968, right? To balance that with recognizing racial injustices. And I'll give you one example because I've thought about this a lot. And honestly, Reverend Lamar, I've been afraid a little bit to talk about it in public. But I wrote a piece about bank CEOs who were embracing Black Lives Matter, but it was all talk, right? It was like none of them were saying, we're going to give back to the communities that my bank has exploited for 50 years through redlining and what have you, predatory lending and all that. So I wrote about that. In the course of it, there was one Black banks or some kind of financial institution CEO who said, understandably, this has made me realize, once again, my own physical vulnerability when I go out. And I looked at the statistics out of curiosity. Yes, that wealthy bank CEO is more likely to be killed by police because he's African American than a white bank CEO would be. But then you go down the line, all the way down the line, Black people at every class level are more likely to be killed by police than white people. But a poor, like, white guy on meth or what have you is more likely to be killed by police than the rich CEO. So how do we express something like that in a way that honors the experiences of Black Americans whose descendants lived through slavery and who suffer through the invisible chains of slavery today, while at the same time bringing in those people who might be white, who've suffered in other ways? I'm bringing up a sensitive subject, but but I feel it's something we're not talking about, and we should be.
Well, I think it's complex. So I would begin with saying that all human pain needs to be honored, and that we need to step back and really make an appraisal of the depth of human pain that has been unnecessarily caused by the ways that we have ordered society. I think that what we need to do is make sure that white poor people understand that the only thing that America has offered them is whiteness. Mm-hmm. It has offered them nothing else. And to use the language and spirit of Lyndon Johnson, they have been offered just one thing, and that is that you're better than niggers, which doesn't pay any bills, doesn't allow you to build any wealth. You are in bad shape. So what we have to do is talk about how systematically, during the Civil War, the planters whipped up the poor white folks to go and do their dirty work, to go and fight, right? We have to tell the story of how, over time, even from the founding, the nation was founded for property owners. The Electoral College was created to protect property owners. The way that we set up taxation today is designed to protect the wealthy and property owners. So setting aside just a little bit, and I'll get into some of the racial politics of it, we need to understand that fusion politics, as described by William Barber, the kinds of fusion politics that existed in some places in the South, go all the way back to, I can't remember the rebellion now, it's early in American history, Hayes Rebellion, I think it was, when persons of African descent and poor whites got together to fight. Because they both realized 200 years ago, we're both being screwed. And so what they doubled down on was the language of race and separation to keep white people and Black people from coming together to fight the economic enemy, which has us both locked up in an inability to thrive. So think about even right now, the current politics of Mr. Trump, the China virus, law. Yeah. It's the oldest playbook to separate people racially so that poor people don't know we're all getting screwed. In America right now, according to statistics I just heard this morning, there between who you read 50 to 55% of Americans are $300 disaster away from poverty. And they have capitalized on these kinds of politics. Now, what we need to understand is the creation of the pseudoscience of race and racism. It was created for an economic agenda, right? And the economic agenda is tied into the racial agenda, into the agenda of white supremacy. But we have to do the difficult work of unraveling. Now, for the Black CEO, we got to be very careful, because I was on a call with some people who were patting themselves on the back for putting more Black people in the boardrooms. I don't care about Black people being in boardrooms as much as I care about the masses of Black people.
Right.
Not pat yourself on the back because you got a Black doctor friend or a Black person at your country club. Pat yourselves on the back when poor people have living wages, have benefits, have pensions. And so we got to be careful of, as you said, the trinkets, the symbolism of I was in your class at Harvard, or I went to Sidwell Friends with you. That does nothing to dislodge the massive poverty that is overlaid with race, oppression, white supremacy. And we are all, unless you are at the top of the ladder, victimized by the lies, and it keeps us from coming together. And I really am hopeful that there is a way to have conversations to bring us together, because as they realize at the time of Hayes Rebellion, Richard, we're all getting screwed.
Yep. And they'll keep on trying to divide us. That's for sure.
Yep.
And, so I thank you for addressing that. I just think it's so important. And, I think it's great when people say, like some Silicon Valley billionaire said, well, we're going to invest in Black-owned businesses. It's great. Why don't you invest in Black worker-owned businesses so that not just the owner, but the 1,000 people who work for it get out?
So what I would say to them is every corporation you own, and notice, I don't want living wages for Black people. I want living wages for human beings.
Right.
If it's for human beings. When Black people were in control of the legislature in South Carolina during Reconstruction, they demanded that every child be educated. That's the beginning of public education. White people never did that and would never have done it because they were wielding power to keep the wealthy wealthy. And when Black people who had been enslaved by those people got power, they didn't say, we're going to get the white people. No, they said, we are going to educate every child because we know what it means to be denied, and we will deny no one, which is why I believe that the country should be run by Black women, and we'd be a lot better off.
Well, I agree with you on that one. I would want to have to make sure we pick which Black women. Now,
well, I would agree. Not just Black women in general. I got a list of 4 or 5. Put my wife up there. We'll be all right.
Sight unseen, I'm going to endorse you. So just because I know you, and unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Reverend William Lamar, the 4th pastor of Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., as always, thank you for your insights. Very much appreciated. And thank you for coming on the program.
Richard, anytime. Thank you so much for your work.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and you're listening to The Zero Hour.